It began with smoke, a gray wisp curling into the morning air, unnoticed by the world, but enough to wake the birds. The street was still. The old lane that wrapped around the back of the town like a forgotten thought, rarely stirred before noon. But that day, before the sun had even fully opened its eyes, the silence was broken by something that would leave an eternal scar on the street, on the people, and on a small cat with orange fur and emerald eyes. She had no name, not one anyone knew of. To the children in the neighborhood, she was simply the burnt house cat. To the elders, she was the ghost cat. To the shopkeepers, the cursed cat. But she had once had a name. It was whispered in softer times, when hands reached out to her with love, not fear. But time had taken the name, like it took everything else from her. The fire had happened on a Tuesday, that's what they said. No one knew what caused it. Some said a candle, others a faulty wire. But all they remembered was the way the flames climbed like hungry monsters, devouring the old wooden house with an appetite that terrified even the wind. Inside that house lived an old man, quiet, strange, a recluse. Some said he was mad. Others believed he was kind. He rarely spoke. But every morning, just as the sun touched the earth, he would step outside with a saucer of milk. And without fail, the little cat would come running. Not for the milk, but for the company. No one ever saw them talk, of course, but animals don't need words. And the old man he spoke with his presence, his stillness, the way he never missed a single morning, not even when it rained, would rub against his legs, purring low and deep, like an old engine. And he would smile, sometimes stroke her back once or twice. Then she would curl beside him, her tail flicking gently as if keeping rhythm with his breath. The morning of the fire, she had come as usual. But something was wrong. The door hadn't opened. She waited, meowed, scratched softly. Still nothing. Then came the smoke. Then the heat. And the screaming of wood giving up its bones to the fire. They said the man never made it out, they said. He died in his sleep. But no one saw. No one could say for sure what happened. All they knew was that by the time the fire trucks arrived, the house was gone. A skeleton of soot and ember. And the cat was sitting there, unmoving, her eyes fixed on the blackened steps. She didn't run, not when the hoses came. Not when the crowd gathered. Not when the roof fell in with a crash that made even the bravest men flinch. She just stayed there, silent, still, like a statue carved from memory. After the fire, people assumed she'd leave. Cats don't linger, adapt, move on, chase the next warm corner. But she didn't. She stayed day after day. She returned to the same spot, the burnt foundation where the house once stood. She would curl up on the ash-covered bricks as if they still held the warmth of the old man's footsteps. When it rained, she sat under the half-standing beam that leaned like a broken arm. When it snowed, she tucked her paws beneath her, her fur stiff with frost. No one could understand it. Not the children, who tried to tempt her with bits of fish. Not the old women, who shook their heads and muttered about souls that wouldn't let go. Not even the priest, who passed by one evening and crossed himself before walking away faster. Then he came, and yet she stayed. It wasn't loyalty, some said. It was madness, trauma. The fire had broken something inside her, but others, quiet, thoughtful ones, saw something different. They saw a waiting, not for food, not for warmth, but for something deeper, a whisper, a return, forgiveness. Because, you see, before the fire, there had been a moment. Just one. No one saw it, but the cat remembered it had been a week before the fire. The old man had come out, as usual, with the saucer of milk. But something had happened. He had stepped wrong, tripped, fallen hard on the front steps. The saucer shattered. The milk spilled into the dirt like blood. The old man had cried, out not in pain but in fear. His hand reached for the ground, searching. He was blind in one eye. Few people knew that. The other eye had started failing too. From that moment, he had called for help, softly.
Not loud enough for neighbors to
hear, but the cat had heard, and she had run, not to him, Not to comfort, but a way it was instinct. A loud noise. A fall. Fear. She ran under the fence into the alley, her heart thundering like a train. By the time she came back, minutes later, he was gone. Inside, safe, maybe, or hurting. She never knew, but that was the moment. The one that replayed in her mind day after day as she sat among the ruins. The one she wanted to rewrite, to fix, to ask for forgiveness. And so she stayed. As the seasons turned, people forgot the fire. Grass grew where cinders once lay. Children began using the rubble as a playground, but the cat remained, watching, waiting, guarding the memory of a moment she couldn't take back. One rainy night, a little girl named Nia passed by with her mother. She saw the cat sitting in the downpour, soaked but still. She pulled her mother's sleeve, asking, "Why doesn't the cat go home?" Her mother looked away, not answering. Because what do you say to a child when even adults don't know why some hearts break the way they do? But Nia didn't forget. She came back the next day and the next. Sometimes with a piece of bread, sometimes just to sit. The cat never came close, but she watched. Her green eyes always watching. Months passed. Nia began to speak to the cat, not loudly, just softly, like secrets blown in the wind. She talked about school, her dreams, how she missed her grandmother. And one day she said, "It wasn't your fault, you know? Everyone gets scared sometimes." That day, for the first time, the cat blinked slowly. It's a kind of blink that animals give when they're saying something without words. And still, the sunflowers bloomed again in the field nearby, and the burnt house remained the same. A silent grave of memories. The cat had grown thinner by now. Her fur lost some of its shine, and the elegant way she once sat had softened into a tired stillness. She wasn't sick, she wasn't old, but something inside her had dimmed, like a lamp burning its last oil. And yet every morning she was there. Her emerald eyes fixed on the same spot, the doorway that no longer existed. Nia kept coming. Now, with a small blanket in her bag and a saucer of warm milk, she asked her mother to heat before school. She placed it gently near the edge of the rubble and stepped back. The cat never touched the milk while Nia watched. But once, when Nia peeked around the corner as she left, she saw the cat drinking. Slowly, carefully, like she was remembering how to survive. One afternoon, a stranger came. A man in his 50s, grizzled and sunburned. He walked slowly around the remains of the house, not saying a word. He wore an old coat too thick for spring, and his boots were worn at the heel. He stood staring at the burnt foundation for nearly half an hour, while the cat sat unmoved on a broken brick. Just a few feet away, then he said softly, "So you're still here?" No one else heard those words, only the cat. But they hit like thunder. She didn't move, didn't blink, just watched him as he pulled a small photo from his coat pocket. A picture of a young man and a kitten. It was grainy and faded, but if you looked closely, you'd know it was her. He placed the photo gently on a blackened beam and whispered, "I never came back. I never said goodbye." The cat didn't go to him, but her tail curled slowly around her paws, as if drawing a circle of memory. The man didn't cry, but his hands trembled when he lit a candle and placed it in the center of the ruins. He stayed until it burned low, then left, not looking back. The next morning, the photo was gone. No one saw who took it. Maybe the wind, maybe the cat, or maybe the old house swallowed it like it did everything else. Weeks turned into months. Seasons continued their silent cycle. People moved on. A new family bought the land and put up a wooden fence around it. They said they might build a garden there, something peaceful, something beautiful. But before they could even break ground, they noticed her. The cat? She would sit at the center of the property, where the old kitchen used to be. They tried to shoo her away, gently at first, then with louder voices, but she never budged. She'd return the moment they turned their backs, like a guardian protecting something invisible. Eventually they gave up, planted their flowers around, A path curved around where she sat, carefully avoiding her place. Children visited and placed little trinkets beside her. A marble, a leaf, a button. She ignored them all. It's not unkindly, but like someone who had seen too much to care for toys. One day, a boy named Tariq came with a story. He sat cross-legged across from the cat and said, "They say you stayed because you were guilty, but I don't think so. My brother left, and I waited for years. That wasn't guilt. That was love." The cat blinked once, slowly, then twice. Something stirred in her, not quite movement, not quite stillness. A shift like wind passing through tall grass. Her ears twitched. She leaned slightly forward just an inch, and for the first time in a long time she meowed. Not the sharp cry of hunger, not the high sound of fear, but a soft, trembling note, like a voice trying to speak again after years of silence. Tariq smiled. That night a storm came. Lightning flashed across the sky like angry memories, and rain fell in sheets, heavy and unforgiving. Everyone thought she'd disappear, find shelter. The next morning, he was still there, soaked, muddy, but sitting upright, proud, defiant. But something was different. There was a crack in her stillness, a tremble in her legs, as if the weight she had been carrying for so long was finally too much. Her eyes looked toward the old steps, then toward the trees beyond the house. And for a moment, her tail flicked, not in warning, but in decision. She stood for the first time in 2 years. She stood and walked away from the burnt house. Not far, just a few feet, but enough. She crossed the new wooden fence and sat under a bench by the road, watching not the house now, but the world. Her ears perked. Her back straightened. She licked her paw.
Hey.
A simple thing, but in that moment, it was everything, and the people noticed. The word spread. The burnt house cat had moved. Some were afraid. Superstitions run deep in places where fire once danced. Others were hopeful. Maybe she was healing. Maybe something inside her had begun to forgive. But what no one knew was that she had dreamed that night. For the first time in forever, she had seen him, the old man, in a dream. He wasn't in the house. He was sitting by the stream near the woods. It's the same place they had once visited long ago when she was barely out of kittenhood. He looked younger, his eyes clearer. He wasn't alone. Other animals were around him. A fox, a bird, a dog with a broken leg. He smiled, held out his hand, and in the dream, she didn't run. She walked to him, slowly, carefully. And when she touched his hand with her head, he said, "It wasn't your fault." Then the dream ended. But the feeling didn't. It stayed with her, like warmth on fur, like sunlight through closed eyes. Like forgiveness, she returned to the ruins the next day. But she didn't sit in her usual spot. She walked the perimeter, smelled the flowers, watched the birds. When Nia came with her milk, the cat approached her. For the first time, she rubbed gently against Nia's leg. Nia gasped, then smiled so wide it looked like a sunrise. She whispered, "You're back." The truth was, she had never left. Only now something inside her had returned to. She still waited. It was different now. Not a waiting of guilt. Not a punishment, but a vigil. A memory. A kind of love that only those who have truly lost can carry. People began to accept her place there. They brought offerings not to feed her, but to honor the unseen, the bond between a man and his cat. The story hidden in silence, the weight of a moment she could never undo, and she in turn gave them something rare. A lesson about loyalty, about time, about the forgiveness that doesn't always come from others, but sometimes, painfully, slowly, must come from within. Still, there were nights when she stared long into the dark, her body still, her eyes full, of things no one could name, because the past never fully leaves. It lingers in ashes, in dreams, in the places where fire once lived, but she was no longer just a cat at a burnt house. She was its keeper, its memory, And maybe. Time has a strange way of folding. Ice. Days feel like minutes, and moments feel like forever. For the cat, time was no longer measured in hours or seasons, but in quiet breaths and memories that lived inside the stillness. The garden around the burnt house had begun to flourish. Lavender and marigolds bloomed with reckless beauty. Someone had even planted jasmine along the path where the old hallway once stood. The house itself remained gone, of course, just a memory etched into the ground. But the space no longer looked like a wound. It had softened, and so had the cat. She moved with more ease now. She still sat in the same place from time to time, especially at dusk, when the sky bled orange like her fur. But she also wandered into the park nearby, the sidewalk outside, the small grocery store, even once onto the roof of a garage where she could see the whole street at once. People began to know her name, not because anyone gave her one, but because they started whispering about her like she mattered. Still here, they would say. She was there yesterday under the cherry tree, another would add. She followed me for 2 blocks, a child once told his teacher, who smiled and nodded like she believed in miracles. It wasn't fame, not really. It was something quieter, deeper, respect. The kind that comes from recognizing pain and not turning away from it. Then one day a stranger came with a box. He was tall, with soft hands and a hesitant step. His eyes scanned the ruins as if trying to imagine the house that once stood. In his box were brushes, jars of paint, and a small canvas. He didn't speak to anyone, just set himself down on a bench and began to paint. The cat watched him from a distance. For hours he painted. His brushstrokes were gentle but firm, like someone rebuilding something that only existed in his heart. And when he was done, he placed the canvas at the edge of the garden. It was a painting of the cat. Not just any painting, but one where she stood strong in front of the ruins. Her head held high, the ashes behind her glowing faintly as if made of light. There was no fire in the picture, only rebirth. People gathered. They stared, some even cried, and the cat, she looked at the painting once, blinked slowly, and walked right past it without pause. Not because she didn't care, but because she no longer needed to be reminded of her strength. A few days later, a boy named Simi came to the garden with a journal. He was 10, with round glasses and a stammer he tried hard to hide. He sat beside the cat and began to read softly. "This is a story I wrote about you," he said. "It's called The Cat Who Was Brave Enough to Wait," and he read it a story of fire, of loss, of silence, and of hope. His voice shook in places, but he kept going. And the cat lay beside him, eyes half closed. The kind of peace that can only come when someone truly sees you. Sami came every week after that, and others started coming to some with letters, some with drawings, one even with a small sculpture. Made of clay. The cat became something more than a symbol. She became a mirror, reflecting back the wounds people didn't know how to speak about. Then came the day when a new couple moved into the house next door. A man and woman in their 30s, quiet and kind. They didn't try to chase the cat away. Instead, they built a little wooden shelter at the edge of the garden with a slanted roof and soft blanket. They left water and dry food, never expecting anything. The cat ignored it for days. Then one night, after the moon rose like a silver lantern over the trees, she stepped inside. It wasn't a home, not yet, but it was something, a space that wasn't filled with ashes or guilt. The next morning, she walked out and curled in her usual spot. The sun warmed her fur, and for the first time she stretched her body fully. Paws extended like she was claiming the earth beneath her again. She began to meow more often. Not loudly, just little sounds, like memories given voice. To Naya, to Sami, to the stranger with the paints. And even once to an old man with trembling hands who stood at the fence and whispered, "I remember the fire. I remember the scream. I should have helped." She looked at him, long and hard, then blinked, slow, forgiving. And he wept. Later that week, a journalist came to town. She had heard rumors about the cat who waited for forgiveness and wanted to see for herself. She spent hours in the garden, notebook in hand, trying to describe something that couldn't be captured with words. In her article, published weeks later, she wrote, "She is not just a cat. She is a story made of silence, stitched together. With fire and memory, she waits not because she has to, but because somewhere deep in her soul, she knows that love never truly burns away. It stays, even in the ashes." The article spread. People from nearby towns came to see her. Some brought flowers. Others brought their grief. One elderly woman laid down a photograph of her husband who had passed the year before and whispered, "If he's anywhere near, tell him I miss him." The cat sat beside the photo for hours then. As if understanding the weight of the moment, she touched it once with her paw and walked away. The town slowly began to change. More benches were placed near the garden. A sign was put up, not too large, but enough to say, "Please respect this place. It belongs to a story." She became part of the rhythm of the place. The children learned to walk gently near her. Teenagers whispered instead of shouting. Even the wind seemed to carry her story now, brushing the flowers with reverence. But one night, she didn't return to her spot. The next morning, she wasn't in the shelter, not on the path, not near the ruins. People searched. A quiet panic rippled across the town. Children drew posters. A group of volunteers walked the woods calling softly. 2 days passed. 3. Then, dawn on the 4th day, Nia spotted her. She was lying by the stream beyond the field, the same stream from the old man's dream. Her eyes were open, her breathing slow but steady. A wildflower rested near her paw. She wasn't dying, but she was tired, very tired. Nia sat beside her and whispered, "It's okay. You don't have to wait anymore." Cat looked at her, and for the first time ever she purred, loud and long, like a lullaby carried on wind and time. She stayed there for the rest of the day. And when the stars came out that night, she stood and walked, back toward the town, back toward the garden, not to wait anymore. She walked differently now, not heavy like before, not burdened. Her steps were still quiet, still soft, but lighter, like she had let something go. The garden around the ruins had become more than a garden. It had become a sanctuary. People came not only to see the cat, but to sit in silence, to remember someone they'd lost, to forgive something they carried for too long. And in the center of it all, she moved like a spirit with a heartbeat, not above the pain, but woven into it. The couple who lived next door added a small wooden sign next to the shelter. It said simply, "She stayed so we could heal." Visitors left notes under it. Folded pieces of paper, tied with ribbons. Some were prayers. Some were confessions. Some were letters to people no longer alive. The cat never disturbed them. She'd sniff them sometimes, then walk on, as if acknowledging their weight. One night, a teenage girl named Layla came. She didn't speak, just sat cross-legged on the cold stone path, staring at the spot where the house once stood. She wore long sleeves, even though the weather was warm. The cat approached her slowly, circled once, and sat beside her without a sound. And Layla began to cry. Not loud sobs, just tears, steady and silent. Like rain that had been waiting too long to fall, the cat pressed her body gently against. Layla sighed. It was that simple touch that opened something. Layla took out a folded paper from her pocket, placed it under the shelter, and whispered, "Thank you for not judging me." That paper stayed dry, even through 2 days of rain. People said it was a miracle, but sometimes miracles wear fur. Then came the winter, harsh, relentless, snow piled high against the fence, and winds howled like old ghosts. People worried for her. Some even tried to take her in to offer warmth, shelter, protection. But she always returned to the garden, until one night she didn't. The next morning, children found her tracks in the snow, leading toward the woods. The tracks were clear at first, then faint, then gone. For a week she was missing. The town felt different, empty, even with people in it. But on the 8th day, she returned. She had a scratch above her eye and a limp in her back leg. But she walked with her head high, tail flicking as if to say, "I'm still here." Nia ran to her and dropped to her knees, holding her hands out like always. The cat stepped forward, pressed her forehead against Nia's hand, sat down, like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The town decided then she was no longer just a cat, she was family. They took turns watching over her. One man built a small canopy to shield her from the rain. A retired nurse checked on her Paws weekly. The school next door wrote a poem about her that they read every Monday in assembly, and still she remained calm, untouched by the attention. Unshaken by the past, she had seen fire, and she had stayed. She had seen death, and still waited. She had seen her own fear reflected in the eyes of those who came to her, and she had sat beside them anyway, because something inside her had changed, not all at once. Slowly, like spring returning to a frozen field. One spring morning, a group of children brought kittens, rescued from a nearby alley. The little ones were scared, huddled close in a basket. The cat approached them, curious but patient. She sat beside the basket for hours. The kittens slowly came out, one by one, sniffing, her tail, batting her ear, climbing her side. She let them. People laughed, took photos, called her anti-flame, but she didn't mind. For the first time in a very long time. She purred while surrounded by others. The kittens stayed in the shelter until homes were found for them. But one, a grand white female, stayed behind. She followed the orange. Cat everywhere slept curled beside her, mimicked her movements. Some said she had chosen her. Others believed the old house had given her a new purpose. One evening, under a sky lit with fireflies, the cat sat at the edge of the garden, the young one nestled against her side. An old man walked by, bent over, holding a cane, paused, looked at them both, and said, "I lost everything in a fire once. My home, my wife, even my dog. But seeing you, it reminds me that something always stays." The cat looked up there. Eyes met, and in that moment, no words were needed, because pain recognizes pain, but so does healing. And now, her waiting wasn't for the old man anymore. Not for forgiveness, not even for herself. She was waiting for others, people who carried burdens they couldn't name, hurts they couldn't explain. And when they came to her, when they sat in the garden, or beside the fence, or near the shelter, she would be there still, quiet, present, the keeper of broken moments, the healer of silent wounds. She never chased the young kitten away, never taught her with growls or swats. It's only by showing her that even in ruins there can be life. Even in ashes, something can bloom, and even after fire, love remains. She didn't speak, of course, but her body did. Her gaze did. The way she would close her eyes slowly, turn her head just enough to say, "I see you. I understand." People said she was aging. Maybe she was. Her movements slowed, her naps lengthened. The silver fur under her chin grew more noticeable. But she was still strong, still graceful, still watching, and now beside her, the younger cat watched two sentinels, two souls. One old, one new, waiting not in grief anymore, but in love. And the town, once afraid of her silence, now built its rhythm around her peace. No one touched the ruins. No one rebuilt the house. They let it be. A sacred space, scar that didn't need to be hidden. Because healing isn't always about erasing the past. Sometimes it's about sitting with it, just like she did, and in doing so, teaching everyone who came to her that forgiveness isn't something we're given, it's something. Spring returned once more, gentle and forgiving, like a promise whispered after a long silence. The garden around the ruins bloomed with an energy so soft, so full of life, that even the wind began to move more carefully through it. The cat now, older, slower, but no less watchful, moved through the space like memory itself, not something forgotten, but something treasured. The younger cat, the grand white one who never left her side, had grown too. No longer a kitten, but not yet old, she stayed close, as if afraid to miss a single heartbeat of the story still unfolding. People still came. More now than ever. They didn't come for spectacle. They came for stillness, for a feeling, for something. They couldn't name, but always found the moment they saw her. She no longer sat in just one place. She moved from corner to corner of the old property. Some days, she sat where the bedroom had once been. Other times, under the tree where the back porch had stood. And at dusk, she almost always returned to the center, to that burned, cracked patch of earth where the front door used to be. No door remained, but it didn't matter, because some doors never close. Even when they're gone, one morning, a little boy came with a bouquet of wildflowers. He didn't know her story. He was too young. But he knelt beside her and said, "These are for whoever you're waiting for." The cat leaned forward and sniffed the flowers, then laid her head gently beside them. Not a single petal wilted that day. The boy came back with his mother the next weekend. She stood still, holding his hand, and said, "I lost my sister in a fire when I was younger. I never forgave myself for not pulling her out in time, but coming here I don't know. I feel like maybe she's not angry anymore." The cat looked up at her with eyes as deep as time, and the woman sank to her knees, weeping softly, as the wind wrapped itself around them like arms. It became a tradition, people bringing flowers, people sitting in silence, people writing on small stones and leaving them in a circle around the old foundation. Each stone held a message. "I'm sorry, I remember. I forgive you. Please come back. I'm still here." She was always there too, watching, not to judge, just to witness. Because sometimes that's all people need to be seen, to be believed, to be remembered. One summer afternoon, the painter returned. Older now, slower. He carried a new canvas, not of her alone, but of her and the young cat beside her. Behind them, the garden glowed. Above them, the sky opened in soft golden hues. The ashes were still in the painting, but they shimmered like gold dust. He placed the canvas at the entrance of the garden and whispered, "You've become more than a story. You've become a reason," people agreed. They began calling the space the place of the waiting cat. No plaques, no big signs, just a knowing in every step, every breath taken within the fence line. It was on the third autumn, after the fire, when something changed. The older cat stopped walking as much. She lay longer in the sun, slept more, ate less, but she was not in pain. Her eyes still sparkled. Her purr, though quieter, still filled the space with something unexplainable. The younger cats stayed close. Always. They curled together like two halves of the same memory. And one night, under a sky blanketed in stars so bright it felt like the universe was listening, the older cat lay down in the center of the ruins, right where the door used to be, right where the waiting had begun. She looked up at the stars. She closed her eyes, and she breathed out once, twice, then still. The younger cat didn't cry. She sat beside her, silent, unmoving, for hours. By morning, the town knew. No one rang bells. No one held a service. But all across the neighborhood, candles were lit in windows, on porches, in the garden. Hundreds of tiny flames, flickering gently in the wind, not as a farewell, but as a thank you. Children came and placed flowers. Some adults stayed long into the night, sharing stories they had never told anyone else before. Grief poured into the earth like rain, and the earth burnt, scarred. Beautiful earth held it without judgment. They buried her at the center. Of the ruins, no tombstone. Only the stones people had left behind, their confessions, their regrets, their hopes. Each one placed lovingly around her resting place. Like the circle of forgiveness she had inspired, the younger cat remained. She didn't sit where the old cat used to sit. She chose her own spot, just off to the side. Under the tree, where light filtered through the leaves like forgiveness falling from the sky. She didn't wait in silence. It's the way the old one did. She meowed softly. Often curiously, she greeted people, nudged hands, watched children, and sometimes, late at night, she would walk to the center of the garden, curl up where the older cat had rested for the last time, and sleep. People whispered then, "She's not trying to replace her. She's just continuing the story." And they were right, because love never ends. It simply changes form. The fire had taken many things, but it had given one gift, the story of a cat who waited not for rescue, not for return, but for the chance to forgive herself for a moment of fear, and in that waiting, she gave everyone around her the permission to do the same. So when you walk past the place now, you might not even notice it. No grand signs, no museum, just a garden, a small wooden shelter, and a grand white cat who watches the world with the wisdom of someone who was raised in silence and bathed in grace. But if you stop, if you sit, if you let your own memories rise, you might feel her. Still, there in the breeze, in the flowers, in the warmth of the ground, not waiting anymore, just watching, just loving.